The mess hall smelled like burnt protein and something David Ross couldn't identify. 3 years since first contact, and human noses still struggled with alien food. He sat at the long metal table, pushing gray mush around his plate while Amira Okonkwo laughed at something on her datapad. Around them, the Stellar Defense Academy buzzed with life. 12 different species ate, argued, and studied together in the cavernous room. The Vren, with their 4 arms and rock-like skin, dominated one corner. The insect-like Quiller clicked and hummed at another table. Floating wisps of energy that called themselves Drath drifted near the ceiling, and scattered throughout, looking small and fragile by comparison, were the 47 human recruits. David watched a Vren cadet lift weights that would crush a human spine. Another species, the Torvin with their 6 legs, moved with reflexes so fast David's eyes couldn't track them. 3 years ago, humanity had received the invitation to join the Galactic Coalition. 3 years of realizing they were average at best in almost every category. Not the strongest. Not the fastest. Not the smartest. Just there. Stop brooding, Amira said without looking up. You get that look on your face like you're trying to prove something. I'm not brooding. You're always brooding. She finally looked at him. We're doing fine here. Why do you always need to make it complicated? Before David could answer, a crash echoed through the mess hall. A human recruit named Peter had dropped his tray. A group of Vren cadets laughed, their voices like grinding stones. One of them, bigger than the others, stood and walked over to Peter. Careful, soft-skin, the Vren said. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. Oh wait, your species already does that just by existing here. Other cadets watched. Some looked away. Others leaned in, interested. David felt Amira's hand on his arm. Don't, she whispered. Peter picked up his tray with shaking hands. The Vren laughed again. This is what happens when they let everyone into the coalition. Standards drop. I heard humans give up easier than any species in the galaxy. Is that true, soft-skin? The mess hall had gone quiet. Even the floating Drath had stopped moving. David started to stand, but a voice cut through the silence like a blade. Sit down, all of you. Instructor Halt entered the mess hall. He was Vren, like the cadet who had been mocking Peter. But where that cadet was young and boastful, Halt moved with the certainty of someone who had survived 150 years of military service. His forearms hung relaxed at his sides, but everyone knew he could move faster than thought if needed. The young Vren cadet sat down immediately. Halt walked to the center of the room, his heavy footsteps the only sound. You want to talk about giving up? Halt's voice carried to every corner. Fine. Let me tell you about the gauntlet. David had heard whispers about the gauntlet. Every recruit had. It was spoken about in quiet voices, usually late at night when the instructors weren't around. Some kind of simulation, some kind of test, and something that terrified even the bravest cadets, Halt continued. The gauntlet is a training simulation designed 300 years ago. 67 species have attempted it. Thousands of soldiers, warriors, the best of the best. He paused, his rock-like face somehow conveying weight. 0 have completed it. The mess hall stayed silent. The simulation adapts, Halt said. It learns your species, your strengths, your weaknesses, your fears. For the Vren, it creates scenarios of endless pain until even our legendary tolerance breaks. For the Quiller, it presents logic problems that contradict themselves until their minds fracture. For the Drath, isolation so complete that even beings of pure energy feel trapped. Every species has its breaking point. The gauntlet finds it. A Quiller cadet raised one of its multiple limbs. Why does it exist if no one can complete it? Because it destroys everyone, Halt said simply. It was designed to break soldiers, to show them their limits. Most emerge traumatized. Some never fully recover. We keep it active as a reminder that there are battles we cannot win no matter how hard we try. David felt something stir in his chest. A familiar feeling from back on Earth, from the days when everyone told him a rescue mission was impossible, that he should give up, that some people couldn't be saved. Has a human ever tried? Someone asked. Halt looked toward the human section of the mess hall. No, and they shouldn't. Your species is too new, too unprepared. The gauntlet would break you faster than most. The young Vren cadet laughed. See? Even the instructor says it. Humans give up easier. David stood up. Amira grabbed his arm tighter, but he gently pulled away. Every eye in the mess hall turned toward him. I'll do it, David said. I volunteer for the gauntlet. The mess hall erupted. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages. Halt raised one of his 4 hands and silence fell again. You don't understand what you're volunteering for, human. David, he said. My name is David Ross. Halt walked closer until he stood directly in front of David. Even sitting, the Vren instructor towered over him. David Ross. I have watched strong soldiers enter that simulation and emerge as hollow shells. I have seen warriors who conquered planets weep like younglings after facing the gauntlet. I am warning you now as clearly as I can. It destroys everyone. David met Halt's eyes. He thought about the rescue mission back on Earth, the people he couldn't save, the guilt he carried every day, the voice in his head that whispered he wasn't good enough, strong enough, brave enough. He had lived with that voice for years. Maybe, he thought, the gauntlet couldn't break what was already cracked. A small smile crossed David's face. Let's find out. Halt stared at him for a long moment. Then the instructor nodded slowly. Very well. You have 72 hours to prepare. After that, the gauntlet will be activated. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl. When you yield, and you will yield, remember that I warned you. David sat back down. His hands were shaking, but he kept them under the table where no one could see. Amira stared at him like he had lost his mind. Around the mess hall, cadets whispered and pointed. The young Vren cadet who had started all this looked pale, his earlier confidence gone. Even he understood that David had just volunteered for something that terrified the entire galaxy. Officer Webb, the human liaison, appeared at David's shoulder. My office now. As David followed Webb out of the mess hall, he heard Halt's voice one more time, addressing the entire room. Let this be a lesson. Bravery and stupidity often look the same. In 72 hours, we'll see which one this was. David walked down the corridor, his heart pounding. He had just committed to something that had broken thousands of soldiers from dozens of species over 3 centuries, something that even the instructors feared. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and doubt, he felt something else. Determination. Because humans had one advantage nobody seemed to understand yet. They were really, really good at being too stupid to quit. Officer Webb didn't say anything until they reached his private quarters. The door slid shut behind them, and the older man just stared at David for what felt like forever. Finally, he spoke. What the hell were you thinking? David had expected anger. Webb was the human liaison, responsible for making sure humanity didn't embarrass itself in front of the entire galaxy. David had just volunteered to be humiliated in the most public way possible. I was thinking someone needed to try. Webb rubbed his face with both hands. Do you know how many complaints I've filed about that simulation? How many times I've argued it should be shut down? It's a relic from a dead species designed to torture soldiers for no good reason. Then why is it still active? Because the Galactic Coalition believes in tradition. Because the Academy thinks it builds character to show cadets their limits. Webb sat down heavily. And because nobody has the authority to shut it down without the Academy commander's approval. And she's 1,000 years old and doesn't care what I think. David remained standing. Outside the window, the rings of Vestra 4 glowed in the light of twin suns. Beautiful and completely alien. I've read your file, Webb continued. Search and rescue coordinator. Led a team into a collapsed building during the Seattle earthquake. Spent 43 hours digging through rubble. Saved 12 people. David's jaw tightened. 14 people were in that building. You saved 12. That's 12 people who went home to their families because of you. And 2 who didn't. Webb stood up and walked to the window. The building collapsed again while you were inside. Your whole team barely made it out alive. The investigation cleared you of any wrongdoing. The families of the survivors thanked you personally. So why do you carry it like a death sentence? David didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain that hearing 12 people thank him just made him think about the 2 who couldn't. That every time someone called him a hero, he remembered the screams he couldn't reach. The gauntlet will find that guilt, Webb said quietly. It will dig into your worst memories and make you live them over and over. It will show you every failure, every mistake, every moment you wish you could change. And it won't stop until you break. Then I'll break. Webb turned around. What? I'll break, David repeated. I've broken before. After Seattle, I spent 6 months barely able to function. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Every sound made me jump because I thought it was the building collapsing again. I broke, officer, and then I put myself back together. Something shifted in Webb's expression. He studied David with new eyes, like seeing him clearly for the first time. You think that makes you special? Every soldier in this academy has trauma. Every species has survivors who rebuilt themselves. I don't think I'm special, David said. I think I'm human. And maybe that's different enough to matter. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to his desk and pulled up files on his data screen. All right, if you're determined to do this, let's at least prepare you properly. These are recordings from previous attempts. I need you to watch them. For the next 3 hours, David watched soldiers from across the galaxy enter the gauntlet. He saw a Vren warrior, muscles like steel cables reduced to sobbing within 20 minutes. A Quiller genius, capable of solving equations that would take human computers days to process, staring blankly at nothing after an hour. A floating Drath, beings of pure energy who claimed to have transcended physical limitations, flickering weakly as they yielded. Every attempt followed a similar pattern. The simulation started simple, almost easy. Then it adapted. It learned. It found the exact pressure point where that species, that individual, would break, and it pressed until they shattered. Notice the pattern? Webb asked. David nodded slowly. It's different for each species. For the Vren, it's physical pain. For the Quiller, logical impossibilities. For the Drath, sensory deprivation. Exactly. It exploits biological and psychological weaknesses specific to each species. The Vren evolved on a high-gravity world where pain tolerance was survival. Push them past that tolerance and they break. The Quiller developed intelligence as their primary survival trait. Show them something that doesn't make logical sense and their minds fracture. What about humans? David asked. Webb pulled up genetic and psychological profiles. We're generalist. Average strength, average intelligence, average reflexes. We don't have one overwhelming advantage, which means we don't have one overwhelming weakness for the gauntlet to exploit. So why do you think I'll fail? Because the simulation will adapt to you personally, not just your species. It will find whatever keeps you awake at night and make it real. Webb closed the files. David, there's no shame in withdrawing. Nobody would blame you. David thought about the young Vren cadet in the mess hall. The mockery. The assumption that humans gave up easily. He thought about every time someone had told him a rescue was impossible, that he should abandon the attempt, that some people couldn't be saved. 72 hours, David said. That's how long I have? Webb nodded reluctantly. Then I better get started. David spent the first day studying every recorded attempt in detail. He made notes, looked for patterns, tried to understand how the simulation thought. Amira found him in the Academy library at midnight, surrounded by data pads and empty meal containers. You look terrible, she said, sitting down across from him. Thanks. I'm serious. You haven't slept. You've barely eaten. You're going to collapse before you even enter the simulation. David rubbed his eyes. The text on the screens had started blurring together hours ago. Did you know that the species who designed the gauntlet went extinct 200 years ago? What does that have to do with anything? They were called the architects. They built impossible things. Structures that defied physics, simulations that could predict behavior with perfect accuracy, and then they just disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to them. Amira pulled one of the data pads away from him. David, you're avoiding my point. Your point is that I'm being stupid, I know. Everyone's made that very clear. My point is that I'm worried about you. Her voice softened. We've been friends since basic training on Earth. I watched you push yourself harder than anyone else, always trying to prove something. But this isn't another training exercise. This is designed to break you. David leaned back in his chair. When I was trapped in that building in Seattle, waiting for the secondary collapse, I had a lot of time to think. I realized something. Humans are really good at surviving things we shouldn't survive. We live in environments that should kill us. We fight diseases that should destroy us. We face odds that should break us. And somehow we keep going. That's not a strategy. That's just stubbornness. Maybe stubbornness is a strategy. David smiled tiredly. Look, I know this is crazy. I know I'll probably fail, but somebody has to try. And if it's going to be anyone, it might as well be the guy who's already broken. Amira was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and grabbed half the data pads. Fine, but you're not doing this alone. I'll help you prepare. And when you inevitably do something stupid in there, I want you to remember that at least one person believed you could do it. They worked through the night. By dawn, David had compiled a strategy. Not a way to beat the gauntlet, he wasn't that arrogant, but a way to survive it as long as possible. Every species that failed had tried to fight the simulation. The Vren tried to endure the pain. The Quiller tried to solve the logic problems. The Drath tried to maintain their form in isolation. All of them approached it as a challenge to overcome. What if that was the mistake? What if the gauntlet couldn't be beaten, only survived? On the second day, David trained his body. He ran until his lungs burned. He lifted weights until his muscles screamed. Not to get stronger. He couldn't match alien species in raw physical power, but to learn his limits. To understand exactly how far he could push himself before breaking. Instructor Halt watched from across the training yard. The Vren approached slowly, his forearms crossed. "You're wasting your time," Halt said. "Physical conditioning won't help in the gauntlet." "I know," David replied between breaths. "But I need to know what my baseline is. When the simulation starts messing with my perceptions, I need to know what's real and what's not." Halt's rocky face was unreadable. "You've been studying the previous attempts. Every single one. And what have you learned?" David stopped running and looked at the instructor directly. "That everyone tries to win. But you can't win the gauntlet, can you? That's not what it's designed for." Halt was silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "The architects built it as a tool for a specific purpose. To prepare soldiers for a war that couldn't be won. A conflict with no victory condition, only survival." "What kind of war has no victory condition?" "The kind that ended their entire species," Halt said quietly. "The architects disappeared fighting something called the Endless. We still don't know what the Endless was. An enemy, a phenomenon, a concept. All we know is that the architects believed soldiers needed to learn how to fight without hope of winning. So they built the gauntlet." David felt cold despite the exertion. "And you're telling me this now?" "Because you're the first person in 300 years who seems to understand what you're walking into. You know you'll probably fail. You know you'll probably break. But you're going to try anyway." Halt turned to leave, then paused. "That stubbornness might be the closest thing to a weapon you have." The third day, David rested. He slept for 12 hours, ate proper meals, and tried to quiet his mind. Amira sat with him in the observation deck, both of them staring out at the stars. "Last chance to back out," she said. "Not backing out." "Didn't think so." She handed him something small. A photo from Earth. David's family smiling in front of their house. He hadn't seen them in 2 years. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because when things get bad in there, and they will get bad, I want you to remember what you're fighting for. Not for the Academy, not to prove something to aliens who don't respect us, for the people who love you and want you to come home." David took the photo. His hands were steady now. The fear was still there, but it felt distant, manageable. He had spent 72 hours preparing his body and mind. He had studied every failure, learned every pattern, and accepted one simple truth. He was probably going to fail. But humans were really good at failing and getting back up. "Time's up," Halt's voice echoed through the observation deck. "Report to Simulation Chamber 7. It's time to begin." David stood. Amira hugged him tightly. "Don't be a hero," she whispered. "Just be you. That's enough." As David walked toward the simulation chamber, every cadet in the academy seemed to watch. The corridors were lined with species from across the galaxy, all silent, all wondering if the human was brave or just stupid. David didn't know the answer to that either. But he was about to find out. Simulation Chamber 7 sat at the heart of the academy, buried deep where the station's massive structure could contain whatever happened inside. David stood before the entrance, a circular door marked with symbols from the extinct architect species. Nobody alive could read those symbols anymore, but everyone knew what they meant. Abandon hope. Instructor Halt stood beside the control panel, his 4 arms moving across holographic displays. Around them, a crowd had gathered. Humans, Vren, Quiller, Drath, and species David didn't even have names for yet. Everyone wanted to see if the human would last 5 minutes or 5 seconds. "Last chance," Halt said without looking at David. "Say the word, and this ends now." David glanced at the crowd. He found Amira near the front, her face tight with worry. Officer Webb stood beside her, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. The young Vren cadet who had mocked humans was there too, though he wouldn't meet David's eyes. "I'm ready." Halt finally looked at him. "No, you're not. Nobody ever is." He pressed a sequence on the panel. "The rules are simple. Once inside, you can exit at any time by saying, 'I yield.' The simulation cannot kill you, but it can make you wish it could. Your vital signs will be monitored. If we detect life-threatening distress, we will pull you out manually. Has that ever happened? Twice. Both times, the subject never fully recovered. Halt's rocky face somehow conveyed regret. The gauntlet adapts to whoever enters. It has no fixed scenarios, no predetermined challenges. It learns from you in real time. What worked for previous subjects will not work for you. David nodded. His mouth felt dry, but his hands were steady. 3 days of preparation had brought him to this moment. 3 days of knowing he would probably fail, but 3 days of accepting it anyway. The door opened with a hiss. Beyond it, David saw only white. Not empty space, not darkness, but an absolute, consuming whiteness that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. "Step inside," Halt said, "and may whatever you believe in have mercy on you." David took a breath. Then he walked forward. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door sealed behind him. The white surrounded him completely. No walls, no floor, no ceiling, just endless white in every direction. He took a step and realized he couldn't tell if he was moving or standing still. Sound felt muffled, like being underwater. Then a voice spoke directly into his mind. Subject identified. Species. Human. Classification. Generalist. Analyzing. David's heart rate spiked. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It was inside his head, bypassing his ears entirely. The simulation was reading him somehow, scanning his biology and psychology. Analysis complete, initiating adaptive response. The white began to shift. Colors bled through like watercolors on paper. Shapes formed. Within seconds, David found himself standing on a battlefield. Smoke filled the air. Weapons fire echoed from all directions. Bodies lay scattered across scorched ground. He recognized this place. Not specifically, but the type. A combat scenario. The simulation was testing if he would fight or freeze. Shapes moved in the smoke. Enemy soldiers, though their features were blurred and indistinct. They rushed toward David from multiple directions, weapons raised. He counted them quickly. 12, then 20. Then too many to count. This was the test the Vren faced. Overwhelming combat. Fight until you break. David did something unexpected. He ran. Not away from the battlefield, but perpendicular to the enemy advance. He found a crater and dove into it, keeping his head down. Weapons fire passed overhead. He heard enemy soldiers shouting, searching for him. The simulation expected him to fight. Every warrior instinct, every military training scenario said to engage the enemy. But David had learned something from studying the previous attempts. You couldn't win a fight the simulation designed you to lose. So he didn't fight. He hid. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. Time felt strange in the white. The battlefield sounds continued, but the enemy soldiers never found his crater. Eventually, the sounds faded. The smoke cleared. The bodies disappeared. The battlefield dissolved back into white. David climbed out of the crater and stood in the empty void again. He was breathing hard, adrenaline still pumping through his system. But he hadn't engaged. Hadn't let the simulation dictate the terms of the scenario. Subject displays unexpected avoidance behavior. Recalibrating. The voice in his head sounded almost curious now. The simulation had expected him to fight like the Vren warriors, to engage in glorious combat until overwhelmed. Instead, David had survived through cowardice or pragmatism, depending on how you looked at it. The white shifted again. This time it formed into a space station corridor. Emergency lights flickered. Alarm klaxons blared. David recognized the design. It was the academy, but abandoned. Damaged. Dead. He walked down the corridor slowly. Doors hung open, rooms empty. No people, no aliens, no life at all. Just him, alone in a massive structure built to house thousands. This was the Drath test. Isolation. Beings of pure energy who existed in constant connection with each other, suddenly cut off and alone. It had broken them within hours. But humans evolved different. Humans spent days tracking prey across empty plains. Humans could survive weeks alone in the wilderness. Loneliness hurt humans, but it didn't break them the way it broke. Species built for constant connection. David found the mess hall empty. He found the sleeping quarters empty. He found the observation deck and stared out at the rings of Vestra 4. Still there. Still beautiful, but somehow wrong. The colors were too bright. The patterns too perfect. This isn't real, he said aloud. His voice echoed in the empty station. Correct subject recognizes simulation nature, adjusting parameters. Days passed. Or what felt like days. David walked the empty corridors. He talked to himself to maintain sanity. He created routines, checking the same locations at regular intervals, keeping track of time by counting his heartbeats, maintaining discipline in the face of total isolation. The simulation tried different approaches. Sometimes he heard voices just around corners but found nothing when he looked. Sometimes he saw movement in shadows that wasn't there. It was trying to make the isolation more frightening, more oppressive. But David had been alone before. After Seattle, after the building collapse, he had spent months barely able to talk to anyone. The isolation had been internal rather than external, but it taught him something important. Loneliness was survivable if you didn't fight it. He let himself feel the emptiness, acknowledged it, accepted it as temporary, and kept moving through the abandoned station one step at a time. Finally, the station dissolved. Back to white, back to nothing. David stood in the void, breathing heavily. He had no idea how long he'd been inside. Minutes? Hours? Days? Time had no meaning here. But he was still standing. Still conscious. Still refusing to yield. Subject demonstrates unusual psychological resilience. Escalating challenge level. The white shifted once more. But this time, it formed into something David recognized immediately. Something that made his blood run cold. Seattle. The collapsed building, concrete and twisted metal, and somewhere beneath the rubble, screams. No, David whispered. The simulation had found his breaking point. He stood frozen as emergency vehicles appeared around him, rescue teams in familiar uniforms. And there, in the middle of it all, a younger version of himself. Younger David shouting orders, coordinating the rescue effort, digging through rubble with bleeding hands. We've got survivors, someone shouted. 2 more here. David watched his younger self work. He remembered this moment. Remembered the desperate hope that they could save everyone. Remembered believing that hard work and determination were enough. Then the rumbling started. Secondary collapse, someone screamed. Everyone out, now! The rescue teams scattered. Younger David hesitated, still hearing screams from below, still believing he could reach them. Someone grabbed his arm and physically dragged him back as the building came down again. The sound was deafening. Concrete crashing, metal shrieking, and underneath it all screams that cut off suddenly. 2 people. 2 people he couldn't reach in time. David closed his eyes. This was it. This was the test that would break him. The simulation had found his deepest guilt and was forcing him to relive it. This was where he would yield, broken and sobbing like the Vren warriors and Quiller geniuses before him. But something unexpected happened. David opened his eyes and walked toward the collapsed building. Toward his younger self, who stood frozen in shock and grief. He walked right up to the memory and looked at the boy he used to be. I know, he said quietly. I know it hurts. I know you think you failed them, and you're going to carry this for years. But here's what you don't know yet. The memory didn't respond, wasn't designed to. But David continued anyway, speaking to himself across time. You're going to save 12 people today. 12 people who will go home to their families because you didn't give up. And yes, you'll lose too. That's going to hurt more than anything you've ever felt. But those 12 people, they'll live full lives. They'll laugh and love and do all the things humans do. Because of you. The scene began to flicker. The simulation seemed confused. It had expected David to break down, to be consumed by guilt and self-loathing. Instead, he was talking to his own memory like a counselor. You're going to blame yourself, David continued. You're going to wonder if you could have moved faster, dug harder, been better somehow. But the truth is you did everything humanly possible. And sometimes that's not enough, and that's okay. The building, the rescue teams, the memory of younger David, all of it wavered like heat shimmer. I failed you, David said to the 2 people he couldn't save. I'm sorry for that, but I didn't quit, and I won't quit. And maybe that's not enough, but it's what I have. The entire scene dissolved, back to white, back to nothing. David stood in the void, tears running down his face, but he was still standing. The simulation had tried to break him with his worst memory, his deepest guilt, and instead he had confronted it, not denied it, not overcome it, but acknowledged it and moved forward anyway. Subject response unprecedented, analyzing new approach. The voice in his head sounded different now, less confident, more uncertain. David wiped his eyes and smiled grimly. The simulation was learning from him, but he was learning from it too, and he had just figured something out. The gauntlet was designed to break soldiers at their weakest points. But what if someone didn't have a weakest point? What if someone was already broken and had learned to function anyway? "Come on then," David said to the white void. "What else have you got?" The simulation paused. For the first time in 300 years, the gauntlet didn't know what to do next. Outside the simulation chamber, chaos had replaced the ordered observation. The control panels displayed readings that made Instructor Halt's rocky face turn several shades darker. Technicians from 3 different species crowded around the displays, arguing in multiple languages. "This can't be right," a Quiller technician chittered. "He's been inside for 6 hours. The longest any Vren lasted was 90 minutes. His vitals are elevated but stable," another technician reported. "Heart rate consistent with sustained stress, but no sign of psychological collapse." Amira pushed through the crowd to stand beside Halt. "What's happening in there?" The instructor didn't answer immediately. His forearms moved across the displays, pulling up data streams. The simulation has cycled through 3 major scenario types: combat, isolation, trauma recall, standard progression for breaking a subject. But he's still conscious and coherent. More than that, he's adapting. Halt pulled up a neural scan. "Look at this." The simulation attempts to trigger a fear response, and his brain acknowledges it but doesn't spiral. It's like watching someone feel pain but refuse to react to it. Officer Webb appeared at Amira's other side. His face was pale. "Can we see what he's experiencing?" "No. The architects designed the chamber to protect the subject's privacy. We only get biological and neurological data." Halt paused as new readings appeared. "Wait, something's changing." Inside the white void, David felt the shift. The air, if it could be called air, grew heavier. The voice in his head spoke again, but this time it sounded different. Less mechanical, almost thoughtful. "Subject continues to resist standard braking protocols, implementing final calibration sequence." The white began to darken around the edges, not black, but a deep, warm gray. And then shapes formed again. But these weren't threatening. They were gentle, familiar. David found himself standing in a living room. His living room, back on Earth. Sunlight streamed through windows. He could smell something cooking in the kitchen. And sitting on the couch, smiling at him with tears in her eyes, was his mother. "David," she said softly, "you came home." His breath caught in his throat. This was different from the Seattle simulation. That had been about guilt and failure. This was about hope and longing. This was about everything he had given up when he left Earth to join the Academy. "I missed you so much," his mother continued. She stood and walked toward him. Behind her, David saw his father appear in the kitchen doorway. His sister came down the stairs, younger than he remembered, the whole family together again. "This isn't real," David said, but his voice cracked. "Does it matter?" His mother reached out as if to touch his face. "You've been gone so long, fighting in space, trying to prove something to aliens who'll never appreciate you. But you can come home now. You can stay." The room felt warm and safe. David could hear his sister's laugh, his father's voice. All the sounds of home he had tried not to think about during the long months in space. The simulation was showing him everything he wanted but couldn't have. This was the breaking point it had been searching for. Not fear, not pain, but desire. The overwhelming want to give up the struggle and return to comfort. David's hand started to rise, reaching toward his mother's outstretched fingers. One touch. That's all it would take. Accept the simulation's gift, say the words "I yield," and wake up. Go home to Earth. Leave the Academy and its impossible tests behind. His fingertips were inches from his mother's when he stopped. "You always told me to finish what I started," David said quietly. "Even when it was hard, even when I wanted to quit." His mother's smile didn't waver. "I also told you it's okay to know when something is impossible. You've proven yourself, David. Nobody thinks you're a coward anymore. You've lasted longer than anyone thought possible. You can stop now. Can I?" David pulled his hand back. "Or would I spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have gone further?" The warmth in the room began to fade slightly. His mother's expression shifted, just a fraction. The simulation was realizing this approach wasn't working either. "I miss you all," David said, his voice stronger now. "I miss home more than you can imagine, but I didn't come to the academy to prove I was brave. I came because humans needed to show we belonged here. And if I quit now, if I take the easy way out, what does that say? That you're smart enough to know when to fold," his father said from the kitchen. "That you value your life and sanity over pride." "Maybe," David agreed. "But also that humans give up when things get too hard. And I'm really tired of people thinking that about us." The room began to flicker. His family started to fade like ghosts. His mother looked at him with something that might have been disappointment or might have been respect. David couldn't tell which. "I love you," he said to the fading images, "and I will come home someday. But not today. Not like this." The living room dissolved. The warmth vanished. David stood alone in the white void again, his chest tight and tears running freely down his face. That had been harder than the Seattle simulation, harder than combat or isolation, because it had offered him something he desperately wanted, and he had turned it away. Subject resists comfort scenario. This is unexpected. The voice in his head sounded genuinely puzzled now. The simulation had tried fear, loneliness, guilt, and now temptation. Each time David had found a way to survive it. Not overcome it. He wasn't strong enough for that. But endure it. The white began to shift again, faster this time. Scenarios flashed past in rapid succession. David found himself in a burning ship, then on an ice world, then falling through darkness. Each scenario lasted only seconds before dissolving into the next. The simulation was cycling through possibilities, searching for something that would work. A Quiller logic puzzle appeared, equations floating in the air. David ignored them. He had no hope of solving problems designed to break superintelligent aliens. A Vren pain endurance test materialized, blades and fire and crushing pressure. David closed his eyes and breathed through it, knowing it couldn't actually hurt him. The scenarios came faster and faster. The simulation was losing its methodical approach, almost panicking in its attempt to find David's breaking point, but humans didn't have a single breaking point. They had thousands of small fractures they just learned to live with. Finally, the rapid cycling stopped. The white void returned, still and silent. David stood in the center, dizzy and exhausted but still conscious. Still standing. Still refusing to yield. Then something unprecedented happened. The voice in his head spoke, but different from before. Not commanding or clinical. Almost conversational. "Why?" David blinked. "What? Why do you continue? I have shown you fear and you acknowledged it. I have shown you failure and you accepted it. I have shown you comfort and you rejected it. What drives you to persist?" The simulation was asking him a question. Not testing him, not trying to break him. Actually asking. In 300 years, this had never happened before. David thought about it carefully. Why was he still here? Why hadn't he yielded when the simulation showed him his mother? That would have been easy. Reasonable. Nobody would have blamed him. "Because giving up guarantees I fail," he said finally. "If I quit now, I definitely don't complete the gauntlet. But if I keep going, maybe I fail anyway. But at least there's a chance. Your species is statistically average in every measurable category. You possess no biological advantages. Your psychological resilience is not superior to other species. Why should you succeed where thousands have failed?" David laughed, a tired, slightly hysterical sound. "I shouldn't, you're absolutely right. I'm not special. I'm not the strongest or smartest or bravest. I'm just too stubborn to quit. Stubbornness is not a tactical advantage, isn't it? David spread his arms wide, gesturing at the white void. What is this whole thing? You keep hitting me with scenarios designed to make me quit. Combat I can't win. Isolation I can't escape. Memories I can't change. And yeah, they hurt. But the thing about humans is that we hurt all the time and we just keep going anyway. The void remained silent. David continued, warming to his theme. We evolved chasing prey across plains for days until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. We're not faster than them, not stronger, but we don't stop. That's what humans do. We're the species that falls down 7 times and stands up 8. We're the ones who face impossible odds and say, let's find out. This is irrational. Completely, David agreed. It makes no logical sense. We should know when we're beaten. We should accept our limitations. But we don't. Because somewhere deep in our DNA, humans believe that if we just keep trying, we might succeed. And sometimes that's enough. The white void began to change, but not into another scenario. The color shifted, becoming warmer. The oppressive weight of the simulation lifted slightly. David felt something he hadn't felt since entering the chamber. Hope. You believe you can complete this simulation? No, David admitted. Honestly, I have no idea if I can. But I believe I can try. And as long as I can still try, why would I quit? Outside the chamber, the control panels erupted with alerts. Technicians shouted in confusion. Halt's forearms moved frantically across displays, trying to understand what was happening. The simulation's behavior is changing, a Quiller technician reported. It's not following standard protocols anymore. What do you mean? Webb demanded. I mean it's stopped trying to break him. It's talking to him. The neural patterns suggest active communication rather than psychological warfare. Amira gripped the railing in front of her. Is that good or bad? I don't know, Halt said quietly. In 300 years, the gauntlet has never done this before. We're in uncharted territory. Inside the chamber, David waited. The white void remained, but it felt different now. Less hostile. More curious. The voice spoke again. I was created to identify soldiers who could fight a war with no victory condition. A conflict that could not be won, only survived. Every species I have tested fights to win. When they realize victory is impossible, they break. But humans don't fight to win, David said, understanding dawning. We fight to survive. There's a difference. Yes. The single word hung in the void. Then the white began to dissolve, but not back into a scenario. It was transforming into something entirely new, something nobody had ever seen before. You have passed the breaking tests. Now comes the real challenge. The challenge the architects designed for soldiers who could endure the unendurable. David's heart raced. What challenge? The white void opened up and David saw what lay beyond. Not another test of fear or pain or temptation. Something far more difficult. Purpose without hope. Meaning without victory. The ability to fight knowing you'll never win and to find that enough. Oh, David whispered. I understand now. And for the first time in 300 years, the gauntlet prepared to reveal its true nature. The white void transformed into something that defied easy description. David found himself standing on what looked like a battlefield, but it stretched infinitely in all directions. No horizon, no end, just an endless expanse of scorched ground, broken weapons, and the shadows of soldiers fighting in the distance. This is what the architects faced, the voice said, no longer inside his head, but all around him. The endless. Not an enemy that could be defeated, not a war that could be won, just conflict that never stopped. David watched the distant shadows fight. They moved through patterns that repeated over and over. Attack, defend, fall back, regroup. An eternal cycle with no resolution. He could hear the sound of weapons, the cries of soldiers, the machinery of war grinding on forever. They created me to find soldiers who could fight this, the voice continued. Not heroes who believed they would win. Not martyrs who would sacrifice themselves for glorious victory, but soldiers who could wake up every day, face an unwinnable war and keep fighting anyway. How? David asked. How do you fight when you know you can't win? That is the question I have been asking for 300 years. Every species I tested had an answer. The Vren said they would fight for honor. The Quiller said they would fight for logical necessity. The Drath said they would fight for transcendent purpose. But when I showed them the true nature of the endless, when I made them understand that their honor, their logic, their purpose would never result in victory, they all broke. David walked forward across the scorched ground. His boots crunched on ash that might have been there for centuries or seconds. Time had no meaning in this place. The distant shadows continued their eternal battle, never advancing, never retreating, just fighting. Why did the architects disappear? David asked. They couldn't find the answer either. They built me hoping to train soldiers who could endure the endless. But after generations of searching, of testing every species they encountered, they realized something terrible. The endless wasn't an external enemy. It was the question itself. The impossibility of finding meaning in struggle without end. The shadows in the distance began to take clearer form. David saw Vren warriors, their forearms wielding weapons with perfect precision. He saw Quiller commanders directing troops with mathematical accuracy. He saw Drath energy beings creating shields and barriers, all of them fighting with skill and courage and determination, and all of them accomplishing nothing. The architects believed that if they couldn't find an answer, if they couldn't train soldiers to fight the endless, then their existence had no purpose. So they simply ceased to exist. They gave up. David felt cold. That's what you do, isn't it? You show people the most fundamental question. What's the point of fighting if you can't win? And when they can't answer, when they realize their courage and strength and intelligence are ultimately meaningless, they break. Yes. So why am I still standing? The voice paused. That is what I am trying to understand. You are not stronger than the Vren. You are not smarter than the Quiller. You are not more evolved than the Drath. By every measure, you should have broken faster than any of them, but you are still here. David looked at the endless battlefield, at the shadows fighting their eternal war. He thought about all the scenarios the simulation had shown him. The combat he couldn't win. The loneliness he couldn't escape. The failures he couldn't change. The comfort he couldn't accept, and he laughed. It wasn't hysteria or despair. It was genuine amusement at the cosmic joke of it all. You want to know why humans keep fighting? David said. It's because we've always been fighting endless wars. Every single human, every single day, fights a war they can't win. Explain. We fight entropy. Our bodies break down, we age, we die. That's a war we always lose. But we exercise anyway. Eat healthy anyway, take care of ourselves anyway. We fight ignorance. No matter how much we learn, there's always more we don't know. But we study anyway, read anyway, try to understand anyway. We fight death itself. Everyone we love will eventually die. We know this, and we love them anyway. The shadows on the battlefield slowed their movements as if listening. Humans live in a universe that is fundamentally hostile to our existence, David continued. We're fragile. We're temporary. We're specks of dust that think and feel and want in a cosmos that doesn't care. Every human knows they're fighting a losing battle just by being alive. And we do it anyway. We wake up, we try, we fail, we try again. Not because we think we'll win, but because the alternative is giving up and we're too stubborn for that. This is your answer. Stubbornness in the face of cosmic futility. It's not futility, David said. That's what everyone gets wrong. Just because you can't win doesn't mean fighting is meaningless. The meaning is in the fight itself. The meaning is in trying, in caring, in refusing to quit even when quitting makes perfect logical sense. The battlefield began to change. The shadows of soldiers stopped their fighting and turned toward David. They weren't threatening. They were waiting, listening. The architects looked for meaning in victory, David said. But victory isn't where meaning comes from. Meaning comes from the choice to continue, from standing up after falling, from trying again after failing, from loving even though you'll lose. That's what makes life worth living. Not winning, but refusing to stop trying. The voice was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke again, and for the first time it sounded almost emotional. The architects could not accept this. They were a species of perfectionists. They built wonders that defied physics. They demanded meaning from the universe itself. When they realized there was no ultimate victory, no final answer, no perfect resolution, they chose extinction over endless struggle. I'm sorry for them, David said, and he meant it. They must have been amazing. But they missed the point. What point? That struggle itself is the answer. Not the end of struggle. Not perfect victory. Just the decision to keep going. To stand up one more time. To try one more day. That's what consciousness is for. That's what being alive means. The battlefield dissolved. The shadows vanished. David stood once again in a void, but it wasn't white anymore. It was filled with color, subtle, shifting, alive. The voice spoke again, and now it definitely sounded emotional. In 300 years, across 67 species, you are the first to understand. The first to answer the question the architects could not answer. Not through superior strength or intelligence, but through simple, stubborn, irrational persistence. So do I pass? You pass the moment you refuse to break. This conversation is not part of the test. This is me trying to understand what the architects could not. How can a species accept eternal struggle without despair? David thought about Earth, about humans throughout history facing impossible odds. Ancient humans hunting mammoths with stone tools. Medieval humans fighting plagues they didn't understand. Modern humans facing climate change and war and 1,000 other challenges. Always struggling. Always failing. Always trying again. Because we're not individuals, David said. When I fall, someone else picks up where I left off. When they fall, someone else continues. No human wins the war against entropy or death or ignorance, but humanity keeps fighting anyway. We're a relay race with no finish line, and we're okay with that. And if humanity eventually fails, if your species goes extinct like the architects, then we'll have tried, David said simply. And maybe, just maybe, whatever comes after us will try too. And that's enough. The colored void began to brighten. David felt warmth spreading through his chest. Not the tempting warmth of the home simulation, but something different. Satisfaction. Completion. The sense of having answered a question that needed answering. I have one final question, the voice said. Go ahead. Would you fight the endless? Knowing you cannot win? Knowing it will never end? Would you still fight? David didn't even hesitate. Yes? Why? Because someone has to. Because it matters to try even if we fail. Because the alternative is giving up and we're human. We don't know how to do that. The void erupted with light. Not blinding but welcoming. David felt himself rising, or maybe the void was falling away. He heard a sound like machinery engaging after centuries of silence. The voice spoke one last time, and now it sounded almost happy. Gauntlet complete. The architects would have been proud or perhaps confused, possibly both. But they would have understood that their question has finally been answered. What question? David asked as the light grew brighter. Whether meaning can exist in struggle without end, you have proven it can, not through logic or strength, but through the simple, stubborn, beautiful irrationality of refusing to quit. The light consumed everything. David felt himself falling or floating or maybe just ceasing to exist in that space between simulation and reality. The last thing he heard was the voice, distant now but clear. Thank you, David Ross, for showing me what the architects could not see. That sometimes the meaning is in the trying. Then silence. Outside the simulation chamber, every alarm and display suddenly went quiet. The technicians stared at their screens in disbelief. Instructor Halt's forearms hung motionless at his sides. Officer Webb had gone pale. Amira gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. On the main display, in letters that glowed with light that hadn't been seen in 300 years, a single message appeared. Gauntlet complete, first completion in 300 years. Subject David Ross. Species human. Rating satisfactory. The chamber door opened with a hiss. Steam or maybe just atmospheric pressure equalization poured out into the observation area. Everyone rushed forward, straining to see inside. David Ross walked out on his own feet. He looked exhausted, pale, like he hadn't slept in a week. His clothes were soaked with sweat. His hands shook. Tears streaked his face. But he was smiling. Amira reached him first, catching him as his legs gave out. You crazy, stupid, impossible human, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. David looked up at Instructor Halt. The Vren instructor stared back, all four arms raised in a gesture of respect David had never seen him make before. I warned you it destroys everyone, Halt said quietly. David's smile widened. It tried, but humans are really good at being broken and working anyway. In the silence that followed, something impossible happened. The assembled cadets from a dozen different species who had gathered to watch a human fail began to applaud. Slowly at first, then building to a roar that echoed through the entire academy, not because David had won, but because he had tried. And sometimes that was enough. Medical insisted on keeping David in the infirmary for 3 days, not because he was physically injured, but because nobody knew what completing the gauntlet meant for long-term psychological health. They ran tests, asked questions, monitored his brain activity while he slept. Every reading came back the same. David Ross was exhausted, mentally drained, but fundamentally intact. On the third day, Elder Sorrow came to visit. David had never seen the Academy commander in person before. She was old in ways that made measurement meaningless. Her species, the Tethran, lived for millennia. She looked like a collection of crystalline structures that somehow formed a vaguely humanoid shape, constantly shifting and reflecting light from within. "Walk with me," she said without preamble. Her voice sounded like wind chimes. David followed her through corridors he didn't recognize. They walked in silence until they reached an observation deck that faced away from Vestra 4, looking out at the infinite stars beyond. "I have overseen this academy for 800 years, Elder Sorrow said. "I have seen 50,000 cadets pass through these halls. I have watched the gauntlet break hundreds of brave soldiers who thought they could succeed where others failed." "You are the first, and I got lucky," David said. "No." The crystalline structures that formed her body chimed softly. "You understood something fundamental that others did not. Would you like to know why the architects truly went extinct?" David nodded. They were testing for something that didn't exist in their psychology. The ability to find meaning in endless struggle. For them, everything had to have purpose, destination, completion. When they encountered the endless, when they realized some conflicts have no resolution, their entire civilization fell into despair. The gauntlet was their last hope. They believed if they could find just one species,
one individual who could fight without hope of victory,
they could learn from that species and save themselves. But they never found anyone. They never found anyone who could pass the breaking tests. Until you, not because humans are superior, but because humans are uniquely comfortable with futility. You evolved accepting that you couldn't control the weather, couldn't prevent death, couldn't ensure survival. So you learned to try anyway. David looked out at the stars. What happens now? Elder Sorrow's crystalline form shifted, reflecting light in new patterns. The Galactic Coalition has been watching. What you did has implications beyond this academy. Humans have been viewed as a minor species, average in every way, but you've demonstrated a psychological advantage more valuable than strength or intelligence. Stubbornness isn't exactly a military asset. Persistence is the greatest military asset that exists. Wars are not won by those who strike the hardest. They are won by those who refuse to stop striking. She turned to face him directly. The Coalition has conflicts that have lasted centuries. Species fighting wars they cannot win but cannot abandon. Until now, we rotated forces to prevent psychological collapse. But what if there was a species that could fight those wars without rotating? A species that could face endless conflict and find meaning in the struggle itself? David felt cold. You want to use humans as endless soldiers. I want to offer humans a role where they would excel, not as cannon fodder, but as specialists in sustained operations. Missions other species burn out from, humans could handle. Not because you're stronger, but because you're built to endure. That's not an honor. That's a curse. Perhaps, Elder Sorrow agreed. Or perhaps it's the opposite. Every species has a gift they bring to the Coalition. The Vren bring strength. The Quiller bring intelligence. The Drath bring energy manipulation. Humans bring endurance. Not physical endurance, but the psychological ability to continue when logic says to stop. David was quiet for a long time. He thought about Earth, about human history, about all the times humans had faced impossible odds and tried anyway. Was Elder Sorrow right? Was humanity's greatest strength also its greatest burden? "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Take all the time you need. But know this, David Ross. You are not just a cadet who passed a test. You are proof that humanity has a place in the galaxy. The question is whether humanity wants that place." Over the following weeks, David became something between a celebrity and a curiosity. Cadets from every species wanted to talk to him, understand him, learn what made humans different. The young, Vren, who had mocked humans in the mess hall, apologized publicly, his voice humble in a way Vren rarely displayed. David didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who had survived something terrible and didn't quite know what to do with that survival. Amira found him in the library late one night, researching something on his data pad. She sat down without asking. "You're avoiding people." "I'm thinking." About what Elder Sorrow said? David looked up. How did you know? Because I know you. And because I heard the same speech. She's talking to all the human cadets about humanity's potential role in the coalition. Some people are excited, others are terrified. Most don't know what to think. What about you? Amira leaned back in her chair. I think Elder Sorrow is right. Humans are good at sustained suffering. We've been doing it since we climbed down from the trees, but I also think being good at suffering doesn't mean we should volunteer for more of it. But if we don't, if we turn down roles where we'd excel, are we really contributing to the coalition? Are we really earning our place here? Listen to yourself, Amira said. You passed the gauntlet. You did something nobody else in 300 years could do, and you're still worried about proving humanity's worth. When is it enough, David? He didn't have an answer. 2 months after completing the gauntlet, David received a communication from Earth. His parents, his sister, everyone he loved back home. They had heard what happened. The news had spread through the human colonies. Their son, their brother, the first person in 3 centuries to complete an impossible test. His mother cried on the video call. We're so proud of you, but also terrified. Are you okay? David smiled, and for the first time in months it didn't feel forced. I'm okay. It was hard, but I'm still here. When are you coming home? He had been thinking about that question since leaving the infirmary. The gauntlet had shown him comfort, shown him home, and he had turned it away. But that was during a test when refusing meant something. What did it mean now? I'm not sure yet, he said honestly. I have some decisions to make. After the call ended, David found Instructor Halt in the training yard. The Vren was supervising combat drills, his forearms gesturing as he corrected a cadet's stance. He saw David and walked over. How can I help you? I want to learn, David said. Everything you can teach me. Not to pass tests or prove anything, but because if I'm going to be here, I should be the best version of here I can be. Halt studied him for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Tomorrow, dawn, training ground 7. Bring water and stubbornness. You'll need both. As David turned to leave, Halt spoke again. One question. Are you staying because you want to or because you think you should? David thought about it. About the gauntlet. About Elder Sorrow's offer. About humanity's potential role in the galaxy. About endless wars and stubborn persistence and the meaning found in struggle itself. Both, he said finally. And I think that's okay. 6 months later, a new class of recruits arrived at the academy. Among them were 73 humans, the largest human contingent yet. They gathered in the mess hall on their first night, nervous and excited and trying to figure out where they fit in this impossible place. A Vren cadet walked past their table and laughed. More humans? Didn't anyone tell you this place will break you? Before any of the new recruits could respond, David Ross appeared. He had been appointed as a junior instructor, training human cadets in what the academy now called endurance psychology. He looked older than his years, but steady in a way that suggested he had seen hard things and survived them. Actually, David said to the Vren, his voice calm and friendly, humans are pretty good at being broken. We've had a lot of practice. The Vren looked confused. David smiled and turned to the new human recruits. Among them, a young woman named Lisa raised her hand. Is it true what they say about the gauntlet? That you're the only person who ever completed it? David nodded. It's true. How? Another recruit asked. Everyone says it's impossible. It is impossible. At least it should be. But humans have this annoying habit of doing impossible things anyway. He pulled up a chair and sat down with them. Let me tell you what I learned in there. It's not about being strong or smart or fearless. It's about being too stubborn to quit. That doesn't sound like a strategy, Lisa said. It's not. It's a philosophy. See, other species are better than us at almost everything. But there's one thing humans do better than anyone else in the galaxy. We fail and we keep trying. We break and we put ourselves back together. We face impossible odds and say, let's find out. The new recruits listened, and David saw something familiar in their eyes. the same uncertainty he had felt when he first arrived. The same fear that they weren't good enough, weren't special enough, weren't worthy of being here. "You're going to struggle here," he told them honestly. "You're going to fail tests. You're going to feel inadequate. You're going to wonder why you came. But here's the secret. That's exactly what makes you human, and that's exactly what makes you valuable." "So we're valuable because we're weak?" Lisa asked, a note of challenge in her voice. "No, you're valuable because you're persistent." "There's a difference." David stood up. "Now get some sleep. Training starts early, and trust me, you'll need all the energy you can get." As he walked away, he heard the new recruits talking excitedly among themselves. Planning, worrying, hoping. All the things humans did when facing challenges. He smiled to himself. Elder Sorrow appeared beside him, her crystalline form reflecting the lights of the mess hall. "You are becoming a good instructor." "I'm trying. That is all anyone can ask." "I have a question, David Ross. Do you ever regret completing the gauntlet? Knowing what it cost you?" David thought about the memories he had faced in that simulation, the pain, the loneliness, the temptation to give up. He thought about how it had changed him, how he saw the world differently now. "Every day," he admitted. "But I'd do it again." "Why?" "Because someone had to. Because it mattered to try. Because the alternative was letting everyone believe humans weren't strong enough." He paused. "And because I learned something in there that I think everyone should know." "What did you learn?" "That being broken isn't the end. It's just a state of being. What matters is whether you keep going anyway." Elder Sorrow chimed softly, a sound David had learned meant approval. The architects would have appreciated that wisdom, or perhaps been deeply confused by it, possibly both. Years passed. David Ross became one of the Academy's most respected instructors, known for his unusual teaching methods and his ability to help struggling cadets find their strength. Humans gradually became valued members of the coalition, not for superior abilities but for their capacity to handle long-term operations that broke other species. The gauntlet remained active, but it was different now. Completion was no longer considered impossible. It was considered a human specialty, not because humans were better but because they were uniquely suited to understanding what the simulation taught. That meaning existed in struggle. That purpose could be found in persistence, that sometimes the answer to why fight was simply because I can. On the 20th anniversary of his completion, David stood in front of the gauntlet chamber one more time. New cadets gathered to hear him speak, a tradition that had developed over the years. "I'm not going to tell you to attempt the gauntlet," he said. "That's a personal decision. But I will tell you what it taught me. Life is an endless series of challenges. You will face problems you cannot solve, wars you cannot win, losses you cannot prevent, and you will do it anyway. Not because you're stupid or naive, but because you're human, and humans don't know how to quit." A young cadet raised their hand. "What if we fail?" David smiled. "Then you fail, and you get up, and you try again. That's what we do. That's who we are. We're the species that falls down 7 times and stands up 8. We're the ones who look at impossible odds and smirk and say, let's find out. And if we break?" "Then you break," David said gently. "Breaking isn't the end. It's just the middle. What matters is what you do after breaking. Whether you let it stop you or whether you put yourself back together and keep going." He looked at all the young faces, human and alien alike, all of them trying to find their place,